Hey folks, Dr. Mike here for Renaissance Periodization, RP Plus, RPU, and Saturn. Yeah, it's got the rings, it's really pretty. I think it's less dense than water, technically. So if you had a huge ocean, somehow it would float. That's what I've heard, don't quote me. Hypertrophy concept, advanced hypertrophy concept lecture number 8. Estimating, not measuring, the volume landmarks. Let's get right into it. First, we're going to talk about why volume landmarks are important, and they are super important. Then we're going to talk about the longhand way to estimate them, which is really just kind of say measure them. Well, much more accurate, but takes months and months, so there's some downsides. Then we're going to talk about how to estimate the volume landmarks in much shorter time frames. These are estimates that come with errors, and we'll talk about that, but they can be very useful. We'll talk about implications for training and then programming recommendations. So, question, why are the volume landmarks important to sort of know? Well, you could say, who cares if you're training at your maintenance volume or your minimum effective volume? Well, hold on a second. Maintenance volume literally means no gains. So you can imagine you thought you were training between your MEV and your MRV, making gains by definition. And all of a sudden, you turned out you've been training at maintenance volume for 6 months, 1 year. You just didn't gain muscle the entire time. What a terrible, terrible thing. Right, and that's a lot of people actually find that out the hard way by really hitting plateaus and saying, I haven't gained for last year. Well, that sucks. Maybe if you had known where in the volume landmarks you were earlier, that would have really, really helped, right? Now, on the other hand, okay, so you should not be at your MV, but also if you're bumping into your MRV all the time, you're probably not making your best gains because you're doing a ton of muscle damage, you're getting a ton of fatigue, you're a needless injury risk, you're interfering with progression, difficult to overload. So if you're training too much all the time, you don't know where your MRV is, you're in a real bad spot, right? The short shrift of it is we really need to know, it would be great to have a method to know roughly where our volume landmarks are, sort of at any one time at any one session. That would be really, really good because then we know where our current training is, and we can, of course, measure them on the long term. That would make it better, but it shouldn't take months to figure these things out. All right. But the formal way to figure out volume landmarks is to take months. So here is the long form estimate. I'm sure some of you guys have seen this before. For maintenance volume, you basically keep volume for a muscle group very low for one mesocycle, and then you assess performance pre and post that mesocycle. And you see if performance improved. If performance improved and you're used to these exercises, and this is in the hypertrophy rep ranges, then you're probably not at maintenance volume. You're probably a little bit above maintenance volume because performance improvement, especially on sort of multiple sets of higher reps, if you improved in that way, then you probably gain muscle, right? You sure can't rule it out. So what you have to do is then you have to repeat that mesocycle with an even lower volume and see when you get to volume performance stability. So when you can be stable performance for 2 mesocycles in a row, then you found your maintenance volume. Because if you've been keeping track this entire time while I've been talking in your head how many mesocycles we're talking about, it's at least like 4 mesocycles at least. And that's if you get the correct guess on the first time to get the lower volume to actually the maintenance volume. So it could potentially be 5, 6, 7 mesocycles. That's a year of training or something like that. That takes a long time. Maybe we can do a little bit faster than that, at least an estimate. What about MEV? Well, you keep a muscle group volume low for 1 mesocycle, and you see if there's a performance gain. If there's no performance gain, then you're under MEV and you need to increase volume a little bit in the next mesocycle and see if there is a performance gain. If there is, and it's a pretty decent performance gain, maybe you overshot. So if you tried 8 sets and you got no performance improvement, then you did 12 sets and you got pretty good performance improvement, then the next question is, okay, so my MEV might not be 12 sets, it might be 10. So you have to do at least one more confirmatory intermediate mesocycle to try to see if that's the case. Now, on the other hand, you could go to 12 sets and you still have no performance improvement, then you still need to go up. So it's an exploratory function that requires, at least 2, probably more like 4 or 5 mesocycles to figure out. Not insurmountable, but definitely a work, right? Nothing you can inform yourself within a certain mesocycle, certainly not session to session. Maximum adaptive volume is very mobile, so it's very hard to pin down. What you can potentially do is do your best guess at maximum adaptive volume and go a little under that. Something like, 14 sets per muscle group per week, and then see what kind of performance benefit you get, and then go up to maybe, let's say 18 per week in the next mesocycle and see if you get better improvement, right? And if you do, get better improvement there, then you probably have to go up to 20 to see if you get even better. But let's say you go to 20 and it's actually worse improvement in performance. And then you say, okay, somewhere around 18 might be where my MAV is, right? But that took you 3 mesocycles to figure out where your ideal training volume is. And there's also MAV is mobile, right? At the beginning of a mesocycle, unaccustomed exercises, when your work capacity is low, it's actually lower, and then it rises slowly throughout the mesocycle. So even that like one snapshot doesn't tell us a whole lot. So we might be able to do better than that if we measure it more quickly. Now, MRV is really easy to figure out. If you had a performance plateau at incrementally higher volumes, you have to repeat that high volume for 2 to 3 mesocycles for a confirmation. Not a difficult process, but again, requires 2 or 3 mesos to be very sure. And if you want to be very sure, you can absolutely use a long way. So there's times when you can use a long way in training and they actually work. If you're in a maintenance phase just for your whole body, you can do some of this maintenance work and figure out where maintenance volumes are, at least begin the process. If you're deprioritizing a muscle group, it's actually really easy. So for example, you put your triceps on the back burner and you're training, chest and back and all the other muscles a lot more. During that time, let's say 3 or 4 mesocycles that they're on the back burner while the other muscle groups are getting bigger, you can play around with maintenance volumes and see where the tricep maintenance volume actually is. That's totally cool. But, muscles only come around to maintenance volume every now and again. Most people and most times are training the majority, technically over 50% of their body at any time between MEV and MRV. So it's like, if you plan on finding out MEVs or MVs by, just being on a deprioritizing phase, you're going to get around to it, but it might take you several years to get through all the muscles. And it begs the question of, after several years, are your MEVs and MVs different? And the answer is probably yes. So there's sort of, as the knowledge gets accumulated, it already outdates itself. There's definitely a problem there. As you train hard, the good news is you'll find the MEVs and MRVs just through hard training. Training between MEV and MRV, you'll find your rough MAVs by getting your best results, and your MRVs by bumping into non-recoverable volumes during your intra-mesocycle volume progressions. But that's still going to take months at a time. We can do better than this. We can do better, and maybe not better is the term, but faster, right? We could get estimates within a session and not months at the likely location of pretty much all the volume landmarks if we go about a certain kind of process. The upside is we get super quick data. The downside is it's not nearly as accurate. These are much more rough guesses. However, it's much better than blind guess, right? So if you're if you're supposed to be starting a mesocycle at your MEV, and you're reasonably sure you're close to it based on your estimate using these methods that we're going to be presenting, okay, that's cool. You might be off a little bit, might be off a lot of it, but you got an idea. It's like using an old map to try to find, some kind of location. It's still a map and some stuff still hasn't moved, right? But, the other alternative is to use no map at all and just sort of try to find it blind. Not the best idea in the world. So these are really good methods. They're not all powerful, but they have their uses of being better than nothing. So first, we're going to talk about indicators. We're going to have methods to find out MEV, MV, MAV, MRV, but we're going to be using certain indicators about how our body responds in the short term, not performance, which is long term, to figure out where we are in our volume landmarks. So here they are, indicators. They are not in order of importance, by the way. They're just ordered as they sort of came to my mind. Number 1 is the pump. Okay, cell swelling is itself causative muscle hypertrophy. So if you have a pump, that probably means you're growing. Might mean you're growing, and the pump is also likely indicative of disruption. Remember that when you get a pump is when you go closer to failure, you accumulate a lot of metabolites, you really push yourself, you do multiple sets. That's all correlation to highly disruptive behavior. That's also probably causative of hypertrophy, right? There's only so much tension close to failure, which is exactly how you grow. You can throughput and not get a pump. The exception of that is for lower upsets. In the 5 to 10 range, pumps aren't super correlated, but we have something for that. So the pump, very partial indicator, but nonetheless tells us something, right? So if we're not getting pumps, we're probably not doing a whole lot of stimulus. We might be at MV or lower. If we're getting really amazing pumps, we're probably at MAV or close to MRV or something like that. Perceived exertion is another one. It's basically how hard a whole session felt for a target muscle group. Like after a certain number of sets, you sort of ask yourself, like, how beat up are my pecs? How hard did I work on training my pecs? Anything from easy to okay to like, okay, I feel it. And then to tough and to like help, for the love of God, I'm going to die here trying to train my chest. And this actually perceived exertion works really good for all sets, and it works really good for low rep sets. You know, a bunch of sets of 8 really, really beat you up, and really like you do 5 sets of 8 in a squat, you're going to feel like you have some perceived exertion, right? It's not going to be missed. Soreness, all right? Soreness is not just a late onset muscle soreness. It ranges from mild weakness and stiffness that accompanies that follows after the exercise for several hours. And then it goes all the way into mild soreness, moderate soreness, severe soreness, all the way up to DOMS, delayed onset muscle soreness, that lasts up to a week and a half after, right? So soreness is a pretty decent gauge of muscle damage. It's not perfect, but it's decent. And because it's a good gauge of muscle damage, it's also a gauge of how much effort you're putting into training, how much stimulus you're getting, and thus potentially if you're doing too much or just enough or just right or not enough, right? So we'll talk about how that applies in a sec. And lastly, performance, but not performance over the long term, but week to week. Right, and this performance one is actually super good to measure, as we'll see in a bit. MRV, right? MRV is, was the volume last week so much that you couldn't recover for this week? How do you find that out? Well, how do you know you're covered? If your performance is down from the usual, then you have a pretty decent suspicion your MRV. Now, it could not be the MRV, but it's better information than nothing at all. So, just a couple of caveats here. These indicators are not ideal. They're just proxies, right? They're not even very good proxies, but they're decent proxies. How do we sort of do a little mental experiment to figure out that they're decent? Well, imagine a workout where a couple of things happen. First of all, imagine a workout where you got no pump. You expended no effort. Basically, it was the easiest workout in the world. No pump, no soreness. And like right after the workout was over, you were like, I can just do this workout completely over again right now. Are you really willing to bet that if you're anything but a true beginner, even true beginners can't say this actually, are you really willing to bet that that caused muscle growth? Because if you are, you just invented the most amazing training program of all time. It causes muscle growth. It barely costs you anything or nothing at all. You can do it over and over and over multiple times a day. You never need to recover. Holy crap, you're going to be Mr. Olympia like in a couple weeks, right? No. Training that easy is probably sub MV, maybe at maintenance volume at best, probably below it, right? On the other hand, let's say you trained and you got a great pump. You expended a lot of effort. You got nice and sore, not super crazy sore. You were ready to perform at your best a few days later. If your diet, et cetera, is on point, your sleeping is good. If this sort of training doesn't cause muscle growth, what does? This is probably somewhere between your MEV and MRV. Maybe it's close to your MEV, right? And then lastly, let's say you got a really good pump, but then you kept training and the pump went away and you feel really flat and you tried so hard, you don't think that you can ever repeat that effort. You guys ever walk away from a workout and you're like, I'm never training like that ever again. I almost died. Fuck that. And let's say you had DOMS for 2 weeks straight, and it took you 6 weeks to perform at that level again, like just to get the mental fortitude to keep going. If there is such a thing as too much, and there is, this is probably it, right? Can you imagine doing a workout like that? And the scientists like sort of examine all your muscles and they're like, actually, you grew really well. This is your best growth. And you could probably do even more and grow. Like, holy crap. We've all had training figured out all wrong. It turns out we do really need to smash ourselves to bits in the gym. The good news about that, if we figure out that's true, it's actually super straightforward. Just kill yourself in the gym every time you grow your biggest. That, at least it's a linear sort of direction. But it's almost certainly not true, right? So this is probably too much, right? There's probably such a thing as too much. So we're going to use these likelihoods and use the proxies to estimate the volume landmarks, and we're going to start with the maintenance volume. First of all, we got to ground these in research so we know sort of where to start, right? And then we use the autoregulation of the proxy variables of the indicators to sort of point us in the right direction, right? If there's a scavenger hunt in a certain city, you don't start at another city, you start in that city, but once you're there, you're going to have a map for the city, sort of something like that. Research tells us that maintenance volume is a very, 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 very low, much lower than many people will expect. 1/3 of normal volume that you're used to training at to get gains at most, in many cases. Potentially, there's at least one study that shows maintenance for months and months and months of muscle mass at 1/9 of the training volume that people used to training with. It's crazy. Think about that. Let's say the average volume you do is a lot. Let's say it's 18 sets a week. That means with 2 sets a week, you could maintain almost all your muscle. That's insane, right? And then with 6 sets a week, you almost certainly maintain your muscle. So very, very low. So then you have to ask the question. So you try 1/3 of your normal volume because you're trying to do maintenance volume, let's say. Question, does it get you a pump? Does it require a lot of effort? Does it get you sore, that volume? Does it have any real impact on your performance? Like, does it deteriorate your performance in the next session? Does it elevate your performance in the next session? So on and so forth. And the answer is probably not, right? So you're likely close to your MV. Remember, close, not exactly at it. If your session is giving you little or no pump, it's okay to get a little bit of a pump, but if you get like a gnarly, awesome pump, then you're probably stimulating muscle growth at that point, right? If the session is pretty easy, okay, difficult sessions are probably so much work that they cause adaptation, not maintenance. Remember, maintenance is easy. It barely gets you sore, doesn't get you sore at all, and it doesn't reduce performance in the next session. So you come in a couple days later and you can do the same session, no problem. Like if a session really beat you up to where you're tired for days and days and days, yeah, it's probably enough to cause some muscle growth, right? So basically estimating MV is really straightforward. If you can check all these boxes or most of them, you're probably pretty close. And then you repeat the session next time and same volume. And if you can still check all the boxes, you just keep going. If it gets a little too hard, then you sort of reduce volume to keep checking the boxes as this slide describes. All right. Next, estimating MEV, minimum effective volume. The thing about growing muscle is you probably have to have some kind of difficulty doing it. It's almost built into the overload principle, and the idea of adaptation is a challenge, right? So you probably don't grow muscle by disrupting hardly anything, but because it's minimum effective volume, it's probably the easiest sort of disruption you'll ever experience. So it's the very beginnings of what you can call challenging, but the very beginnings of what you call challenging, right? It's like playing a video game on easy mode. You can just close your eyes and win the game. You got to try, but it's not that tough, right? You gotta focus. You'll jump over this little bridge here. I don't know how the hell video games work nowadays. You shoot your buddies in the face with a 50 cal, whatever. But it's got auto aim, so it's not that hard. And your buddies are, working 3 times slower than you are, something like that. So, how do you know if you're close to your MEV? Well, you might get a little bit of a pump, but nothing huge. The perception of effort isn't too hard, but it's definitely a workout, right? You don't walk away from minimum effective volume and say, man, that was the easiest thing I've ever done. You're like, okay, I see. That workout was something, right? But if someone was like, oh man, end of the world, right? You're like, nah, that wasn't that hard, right? MEV training doesn't have to get you sore, but you can at least feel like a weakness in your muscles for some time after, or even get a little bit sore. So you could do like 4 sets of curls, let's say that's MEV. After the training for a couple of hours, you're like, ooh, yeah, no, something happened on my biceps. They don't exactly feel normal. Like if you woke up on a day where you're supposed to be doing curls and your biceps feel like the day they do after an MEV workout, you're like, oh, I don't think I'm healed, right? Something's wrong here. It's not, I don't feel that kind of power, and it feels a little weak, a little stiff, something like that. And potentially can be a little bit sore, but if you're grandiosely sore, it's almost certainly over MEV. The volume's way plenty enough to recover from, so your next session, you should not see a reduction in performance. Easy checklist. So for example, if you do a crazy workout, and you're like, that's MEV, and the next time you come in and you totally shit the bed and the workout's way too hard because you're still sore, still beat up, still tired, then your last workout was almost certainly above minimum effective volume, right? Now, estimating MEV, how do you do that? Remember that MEV is in a range. Best growth is in a range. It's not an exact figure, but the middle of that range probably corresponds to the best growth. Just sort of our easy guess. The way we use the autoregulators in this case is you're probably pretty close to your MAV if you can detect a couple things. First, you're probably getting a pretty good pump. Like unless you're in the 5 to 10 range, and then the perception of effort is what we really look at. But anything in, sort of 8 reps and above, you're going to get a really good pump from MAV training. It's pretty challenging. It really pushes you. It's not the end of the world, but it's like, ooh, yeah, that was definitely a workout. That was tough, right? If you think you can get maximum adaptive volumes with almost no challenge at all, then what you're really saying is you can get your best gains in a really easy way, which is, again, the question back to you, what's stopping you from being Mr. Olympia? Number 3 is that it gets you pretty weak for some hours, but often, you get a little bit sore for some muscles, and so some muscles quite sore even for a few days. Right, so after an MEV workout, you're like, oh, I feel it. After MAV, you're like, ooh, okay, yeah, we need some recovery time for this. And it could be only a day of recovery, but then the hours after you feel pretty weak and pretty tired, or it could be up to several days, right, depending on the muscle and exactly how much volume you do. No performance reduction in the next session because by definition, because it's below MRV, it's enough. It's not so much volume that you can't recover from it, but it should definitely be like, okay, recovering for the next session is going to require that I eat well and sleep well and so on and so forth, right? Training at MEV recovery is almost like a matter of course. Like, of course I'm going to recover. This is easy to tell. MEV is like, it's a hard workout. Like, you got to make sure you're on your P's and Q's or else, potentially you could get close to not being able to recover. Just a quick reminder, so we actually do have some data on this, which is really good. James Krieger's analysis found that MEV is, in a small sample of studies that he looked at least, was around 8 sets per muscle group per week. So something like 4 to 12 sets per muscle group per week is probably where most folks' MAVs will be found at various times in their cycle. And that's a good workout, right? It's nothing too easy. You do 5 sets of leg presses. You're not like, that was easy, right? But on the other hand, you're not doing 20 sets of various curls and frying your biceps off the bone, so it's not the end of the world. Speaking of the end of the world, how do you estimate MRV? MRV estimation is actually super, super easy. It's actually the most numeric, so it's really straightforward. Recovery, by definition, means a return to past performance. And if you can perform on pace from last week, you're not over MRV no matter how you feel. So this is actually a common misconception that Dr. James Hoffman likes to refute every now and again, because people say, hey, like, I'm sore, I'm tired, I think I'm at MRV. It's okay. How was your 2 weeks ago performance in all of your exercises? They're like, it was good. I hit my numbers, hit a couple PRs. Like, what about last week, the week after that? Like, it was good. I hit all my numbers. I beat most of my numbers from last week. And on average, my performance is just actually better. His answer is you're not at MRV. So maximum recoverable volume means it's the most you can recover from it. Any more than that, and you cannot recover, which means you cannot perform, right? So your performance has to be down significantly from last week. If it's down significantly from last week, it might be a fluke. But if it's down significantly from last week in 2 sessions for the same muscle group, multiple sessions for the same muscle group, then you're probably looking at an MRV, or very likely. So for example, let's say you have 3 chest workouts a week, Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. Last week, you hit XYZ number of sets and reps. This week, on Monday, you don't match your last Monday's work effort. Like, you're just not as strong for reps. And you think, fuck, MRV. Not so fast. Maybe it was just a bad day. Your girlfriend punched you in the balls or some shit like that. And you say, okay, well, we'll see how Wednesday goes. If Wednesday shit the bed again, it's probably MRV, right? On the other hand, if it's also Friday, unless some weird stuff's happening to you that week, like some obvious stuff, like you're not sleeping, you're not eating, crazy stress, right? Some kind of injury. If for no explainable reason, you're crapping again on Wednesday and crapping again on Friday, it's almost certainly MRV, and it's time to do something about it, like reduce volume load, take a deload, so on and so forth. But if you have an off day on Monday, and then on Wednesday and Friday you hit PRs again, or just train as hard as ever and perform right up to par, then it's just Monday was actually a fluke, and you don't have to worry about it, right? So basically, an example MRV here is you hit legs twice a week. Last week, let's say you did 225 pounds in the squat on Monday for 12, 10, 8, 6, and 315 in the leg press on Thursday for 20, 18, 16, 14, right? So this coming Monday, the Monday after, you hit 230 in the squat, and you would expect, like, my RR is going to be lower, a little closer to failure, so I should probably get about the same reps at 230 that I got at 225. But you hit 10 reps on the first set instead of 12, then at 744. I mean, it's definitely down. You're definitely not performing. Because someone came up to you after that workout and was like, hi, how'd you do? Good workout? You're like, no. I was stronger last week, right? That's not great. Okay. So by definition, you didn't recover from last week, but you think, hey, maybe it's just, fluke, right? Sometimes it happens, right? So then you come in Thursday, optimism, and you go and put 320 in the leg press, just 5 pounds up from last week, 1 less rep in reserve or something like that. And you're expecting roughly the same reps, except instead of 20 on the first set, you get 17. You go 10, 8, 8, which is like on the third set, that's half of the reps you were expecting. Definitely down 2 in a row, and it's almost certainly it was time to call it. That's MRV, and maybe do something about it, deload, so on and so forth. So really, really straightforward for MRV. Right? So taking all of this together, what are the implications for training? Well, first of all, if you use these estimators, you can just do a better job guiding your training from day one. Like, in fact, you can actually use intra-session guidance. For example, one of the things is pump. Like, how much of a pump do you get? If you're trying to aim for MEV, you want like a small pump. If you get a small pump after 3 sets, but you keep going to 4 and 5 sets to get a massive pump, and they're like, whoa, I wonder if I'm over MEV. Well, of course you fucking did it to yourself. So as soon as you get a small pump and a small perception of effort and think it's a decent workout, but it's not the end of the world, leave the gym, right? So pump and effort perception can absolutely be used in the workout itself, right? Not rocket science. And then soreness in the days after and performance in the days after. And all of a sudden, you have indicators during the session and for sure over the course of a half week. So this sort of setup basically allows you not to be in the dark. And it's sort of every half week, you get a really good approximation of where your training is in relation to volume landmarks. Is it between MV and MEV? Is it between MEV and MRV? Is it close to MAV or not? So on and so forth. This is a really, really good thing. So, when you're trying to train at MV, use the rating scale to raise or lower volume every session to try to get close to MV by what the rating scale says. If you're starting most of your mesos at MEV, which is usually where you start most of your mesos, you got to make sure you're not too high or too low for the first several weeks. And this is where doing the rating perceived exertion and the pump indication during the session really, really helps. Like, you come in, you got some new exercises, you're not so sure what your MEV is with them, and you say, okay, I'm going to do like 3 to 5 sets total for chest today. I don't know where MEV is, we'll find out. Let's say after 3 sets, you got no pump and you barely feel like you worked. That's probably not MEV, so you do another set. And after 4 sets, you're like, a little bit of a pump, feel like I did something. Okay, stop at 4. But on the other hand, you might get to 2 sets and be like, wow, I feel like I'm really doing some stuff and I'm starting to build up a pretty good pump here. It's time to cut it off. Seems like MEV is really low for 2. And it depends on exercise and a bunch of other factors, right? After you do MEV, most of your sessions for the rest of the mesocycle should really just check pretty close to the MAV box. Like, you're getting really good pumps, you're getting a little bit sore, maybe just a little twinge of weakness and so on and so forth. Your perceived exertion is like pretty good, but not the end of the world. Like, that's where most hypertrophy comes from, is sequenced workouts like that, right? And then MRV detection is real straightforward. If you're underperforming at any point 2 times or 3 times sequentially in the same week, it's time to cut it off, recycle, rinse and repeat. And that's it. So these are really, really cool estimators. Good luck using them. Remember, they're not perfect, but they're better than nothing. Folks, that's it for this time. Let's see what we're talking about next time. It is progression within a mesocycle. Ooh, see you then.